Moving Mars by Greg Bear. So this is episode 81 of this ongoing series that I'm doing. And this book was copyright 1993, and it won the 1994 Nebula Award for Best Novel. And it was also nominated for some other awards, including the Hugo, as you can see on the front there. But it lost that year to Kim Stanley Robinson's novel Green Mars, which is the second book in his Mars trilogy. Now, you can see a lot of books are being written about Mars at this time. I've read the Mars trilogy, and while it has its pros and cons, I overall really did like that one. This one definitely has its pros and cons, mostly to do with the pacing and some of the plot conflict to me, but it was enjoyable. I am happy I read it, but it was a slog to get through at times, and I'm really just kind of glad that I'm done reading it. But let's just kind of get into what this one is about. So it takes place starting off kind of around the year 2170, and mankind has kind of spread out to the moon and to Mars, and these are the three main political factions that are kind of vying for power in the solar system. So we have Earth's moon, and Mars. And Earth, of course, has the biggest side here. They've got the most people. They've been around for the longest. And so they're kind of trying to throw their weight around. And you have the moon, which is talked about a little bit, but Mars is really trying to kind of work towards some of its independence, just like the Mars trilogy from Kim Stanley Robinson. But where the books really differ is in this story, where it's all told from the first person point of view of our main character, and her name is Cassia, I think is how you pronounce it. And she's kind of retelling her life story, and she starts off talking about when she was in college and she got involved in a political protest to something that the university did. And she got involved with some people who ended up being very key people for the rest of her life. She made some relationships that will last throughout the whole novel. And it kind of started her off on this career in politics. So this is a very political-based science fiction book. A lot to do with the politics between Earth and Mars trying to kind of go out on their own and be more independent. And there's also this other big layer of this one, which has to do with technology. And I think that was more my favorite part of this book, is all of the technology that Greg Bear talks about, from these crazy suits that they can slap on themselves to go out onto the surface of Mars, to what one of the main plot devices used in this one. It has to do with AI and a very highly advanced artificial intelligence that starts using quantum logic to go beyond what they ever thought was possible. They use humans to kind of help guide these AIs, and these humans are also enhanced. And they start doing things with the laws of physics that we think were not even possible, or it starts kind of breaking down the laws of physics. And so the whole novel is really our main character as she rises up to power on Mars. She even gets a chance to go on a trip to Earth, which is a very costly and long journey to go to Earth. And she gets to go there to kind of be a delegate for Mars and get involved in some of these negotiations that are taking place. But she eventually ends up back on Mars, and the conflict between Earth and Mars keeps brewing up to a point where like war seems to be inevitable, some form of war in this future, not probably the war we're all used to. And that's where this technology really comes into play, because Earth and Mars, and possibly even the moon, we don't hear a lot about the moon, but they've all been kind of using some of this quantum logic technology. And Mars seems to be a little bit ahead of Earth on this aspect. And they've done some experiments that exceed anything that Earth can do. So if a war starts brewing, Earth definitely has the numbers and the resources and all of this, but there's this secret weapon that Mars has with this new ability they're learning through quantum states of matter and beyond. So, that's kind of the whole story on this one. It does take a long time to get to where the conflict starts brewing. Like, that's what I said. Probably the biggest issue with me, for me on this one, is that you have to get about 2/3 of the way through the book before this even starts getting to a head, and then the last maybe 10% or 15% of this book, it really moves at a breakneck speed and all kind of comes to a head in a way. But there are some other pros and cons here. So the biggest pro for me is the way Greg Bear can write these scenes that seem almost impossible to describe. If you're breaking down matter into, quantum states that are even hard to imagine, he can write these scenes like no other that I've come across yet. They're very uniquely Greg Bear. He does enough to let you fill in the gaps and make these scenes just pop in your head, and he's just a master at that. And some of the technology he came up with in this book is just amazing too. But some of the problems I had, some of the cons, are this conflict that ends up happening seems to be kind of unrealistic, and the stakes are so high, and you're wondering how the stakes even got this high. We spent 2/3 of the book kind of world building this political scene just to have it kind of go all the way up to 11, and it didn't seem like the stakes needed to be this high. But that was just some of my thoughts. He definitely had to take the novel to this point to do what he wanted to do with the novel, and the way he wraps up some of these conflicts is pretty amazing. I've never read anything like this in science fiction. So those ideas and everything were done well, but how we got there just didn't seem to fit just perfectly. Now, I also I'm a little reluctant when I see a male science fiction author writing a female character, especially when you're talking about her coming of age and some of this stuff. And I think he did a pretty good job with that aspect, her coming of age and, blossoming as a human and everything. That wasn't my biggest problem. My biggest problem was some of these relationships she ended up having with people. And the comings and goings of some of these relationships just didn't seem very realistic. They were handled very nonchalant, and we spent so much time in this character's head that it just seemed like it was just unrealistic the way she handled some situations with some other characters. But there was nothing overtly wrong with the way he wrote this female character. It was just some of the characterizations in general just didn't seem that realistic. So that's it. I don't know. For a 500-page book, it took a long time to get into the very interesting parts, and I don't mind a long setup and getting into like a real character-driven story, but he spent so much time building up these characters just to kind of have them do unrealistic things, and that was kind of my biggest problem with it. But, overall, I am really glad I read this one. It's another Nebula Award-winning novel now that I can check off the list. I'm not sure that I would really recommend this to people. I think there's probably better books to read from Greg Bear. I definitely want to read more books from Greg Bear. This is in no way turning me off from his writing or anything like this. I think this is a very solid novel. And like I said, I'm glad I read it. So that's going to be it for that review. I've got a couple books I'm thinking about reading here next. Probably The Space Merchants. That seems like a nice, short, different kind of book to read after reading Moving Mars. And I'm also going to be starting to read some of the short stories in the best of Henry Kuttner so that I'm prepared to do a video with Matt and Richard when we talk about this one, probably later in this month or next month. So that's going to do it for this video. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.